Hey, everybody. Hope you're all doing well today. There's been a lot of mob related news the last few weeks, and I wanted to give you my thoughts on some of these items that we've been seeing on the news recently. After a quiet spring and summer, you're starting to see more New York mob stories. They started popping up, I would say, about a month ago. And one of the questions I want to address today is the mob back in 2025? And why is it that there's a chance for a renaissance if we're to believe law enforcement and mob reporters? In addition, we have some interesting details about these two gambling indictments, with one involving four of the five New York families and people with the NBA. I want to talk specifically about the bond hearings and who got out and some of the huge amounts that these guys had to pay. And finally, I actually have some more details about Huck Carbonaro's passing, some of the issues that he'd been dealing with from a health standpoint, and also the last ditch effort, the last few, just a few days before his passing for compassionate release. So without further delay, on to the rest of our presentation. So, I was drinking my coffee this morning, reading Gangland News, and I found Jerry Capisi's article today pretty fascinating. And I wanted to share what my thoughts are, and specifically on what he put out today. And Jerry's a legend, or at least in my mind, when it comes to New York mob reporting. And I look back and I think he's been in New York doing these doing gangland news either in newspapers or on the website since the 1980s. So I mean the guy's been around a long time, I guess going on 40 plus years. And I know he's getting up there in age, and then this summer, I don't know if you guys realize this, but he made the decision to cut back his weekly Gangland News series to once every 2 weeks. I mean, he had been doing it every week, for years, and I know that he's trying to cut back a little bit, so it's now every 2 weeks. And honestly, I don't think it's a big deal because the question I have is there really enough mob news to put it out on a weekly basis? And for those that are interested in gangland news, I think you can get it for I think it's $25 a year, something like that. But it's well worth it, in my opinion. And at least in my mind, he's still the GOAT. So the two mob reporters that I consider the best in all of this mob genres, Jerry Capisi, dealing with the New York Five families, and then George Anastasia for information related to the Philly mob. And so what I found interesting is that Capisi met with Bruce Mao. He talked with Joe Pistone, and then a couple of the other agents like Jack Garcia and George Gabriel. And so what's going on now is that the FBI has reduced the organized crime squads to only one. So you remember we just had the interview with Seamus that in the with the Flippin' Capo book. We brought Seamus on and had the interview, and back then you had five organized crime squads. In fact, I believe up until 2011 you had five organized crime squads, but now today you only have one squad, and they're trying to look after all five families. And you've got two districts. You've got the Eastern and the Southern district that you got this one organized crime squad is trying to, keep tabs on the mob. And so people like Jack Garcia and George Gabriel are calling this Christmas in September for the mob. And the warning there is that this the under resourcing of agents for organized crime is going to basically allow the mob to rejuvenate and could even go back to the days of like in the 50s and 60s. So they're concerned that Cosa Nostra would get back involved in construction. They could get back involved in the waterfront and unions. I don't think it'll get to that point. We still got cameras. We still, today you don't. I don't believe that you have as many people in the mob, even though I know that this reporter De Stefano is trying to say that the number of people made in the mafia today for New York is the same as it was back in the 70s and 80s. I don't believe that, but I do think that it's like when the cat's away, the mice play. So I do believe that that does increase the risk of the mob being able to do more criminal activities, but I don't see the mob going back to doing murders and all that. I think they learned that violence is the worst thing that you can have today. But I think you're going to have more of these type of opportunities, these schemes, these scams. I think you'll be seeing things like online type scams going on. And I do think that with only one organized crime squad now for all of New York and those five families, that we're going to see a little bit of a rejuvenation. But even with the reductions in the number of agents, you're still seeing cases like what we just talked about with the NBA and the mob. So I think law enforcement definitely has the advantage still, but it does give a little bit of breathing room for the mob. The last thing I want to talk about is Huck Carbonaro. So I did a recent video on him. I talked about him dying in prison. He was 77 years old. But we're finding more details about how bad things were for him the last few weeks. And so, and this comes from Gangland News today. And so Huck, they said that he died in federal custody on October 23rd at the age of 77, which we knew. But he had surgery 1 week before that, and they amputated his leg. And the doctors told him, I guess, a day or two before he passed, that they were going to have to remove the other leg. And so most likely that meant the guy had diabetes or had some sort of problem where blood flow wasn't getting to his legs. And so what a way to go to he wouldn't be able to walk. He was definitely in a bad situation. Also, at the time of that surgery where his leg was amputated, his lawyers filed a 41-page motion for compassionate release. They were asking the courts to allow him to spend his remaining days with his family. And it was basically pending at that point. So, like several of these other mobsters that go through compassionate release, many of them die before it gets looked at. And so Huck had been serving a 70-year sentence for the 1999 murder conspiracy plot to assassinate Sammy the Bull Gravano in Arizona. And what's interesting is that initially the prosecutors were only looking for a 30-year sentence. And so if he had agreed to the 30 years, he would have been able to get out in 25 years, 26 years. So he would have been out probably in like 2015 or so. So he had been out for 10 years, but I believe he tried to fight the case, and so he ends up getting 70 years instead of the 30 years initially sought by the prosecutors. It's kind of the same thing with Vinny Basciano. He was offered 20 years on his cases, and he wanted to fight it, and so ends up getting life in prison. And so this is another guy in a long line of aging Gambino defendants that die in prison. Peter Gotti, he died in 2021, and then in 2020, Eddie Garofalo died. So, really, the what else he was suffering from, I forgot to mention this. So besides what I think he probably had diabetes, he also had rheumatoid arthritis. He had osteoarthritis, asthma, anemia, hypoglycemia, and he had a hernia in his esophagus. And they said that he could no longer eat or drink anything because he had a burnt out esophagus. So basically, he had acid reflux, and through the years, the acid had burned out his esophagus. And for 6 weeks, he had been vomiting 8 to 10 times a day, and he couldn't even retain his medication orally. And so we know that uh, his wife Catherine was still close to him. She was willing to take care of him. Also, he had a son, Thomas Jr., daughters, Christina and Aline, and 3 grandchildren. They all were ready to care for Huck if he was released. But basically, the plea never got looked at. And also back in 2021, the same Judge McMahon, denied the request for compassionate release. And what McMahon said at that time was a 70-year term was harsh but lawful. So basically, the guy has rapid systemic deterioration since last year. Gets a amputated leg due to vascular disease. Oh, they said he got gangrene in the leg. He's going to lose his second leg, but he ends up dying in prison. So the funeral and his legacy. So it's interesting, despite decades of being in prison, he still had a lot of respect within New York's underworld. They said dozens of wise guys and associates from all 5 families attended his wake, which was at Scarpazzi's funeral home in Brooklyn. And then the next day he was buried in Greenwood Cemetery. And there's a lot of mobsters that was buried at Greenwood. And so the people there, the mourners described him as a stand-up guy who never flipped, and they called him an old school guy. And there was a lot of people that had wished that he had actually fulfilled taking out Sammy the Bull Gravano. So, I think for me, the big thing on this is that I think this case really shows the moral tension in federal sentencing guidelines for elderly organized crime inmates. I believe that the prosecution overreached on this. You have a 70-year sentence that was double the government's own recommendation. So, we need to see if this compassionate release is going to work or not for these aging wise guys. And so I just wanted to put it out there that they tried to give him another compassionate release attempt, but he died before they could act on it. So anyway, that's all I had for you today. I look forward to your comments. Also, please hit the like button. Also, consider subscribing to the channel. And until next time, take care, stay safe, and God bless you always.